So we're halfway through the year. We don't know what the budget's going to be yet. Taxes went up a bit in the first half of the year. I noticed. Do you know what's going to the tax? I guess when the budget's done, are we still going to get 4 quarters worth of tax bills, or?
Yeah, you'll get your actual tax bill sent out at the end of the summer. But as far as what we're trying to do, we're trying to go over everything right now, line by line. And I want to make it very clear that Middletown, we have one of the lowest worker per capita in the state. We have about 310 employees.
Right.
We have 70,000 people, 41 square miles. We're one of the largest entities in the state as far as municipalities go. So there's not a lot of room to cut when that happens.
Yeah.
You know? So we're down about as low as we can go. We have about 100 police officers, you know, and we have very low debt. There's not a lot of fat. In fact, most municipal budgets are over 80% non-discretionary. So even if we wanted to cut, we couldn't, you know, because there are statutory regulations, there's mandates that you have to meet, there's minimum staffing levels, there's all of these things that figure into it. So it's not a lot of choice in there, and we've cut out everything that we possibly can. And a few things, I've gotten some complaints about some of the things that we're cutting out. You know, we're closing, for instance, the miniature golf course. We're closing that. We're closing the skateboard park. Middletown Day is on the block unless we can get private funds to back it. All of the concerts that we have are being privately funded, so there's not going to be any municipal expenditures for these things. We're trying to preserve things that mean a lot to folks, and in these tough, austere times, you want people to have these sort of low-cost family options. So we're doing the best we can without having it impact the tax rate.
You were talking about all the rules and regulations on how things are now, and the governor's toolkit, the 33 bills that hopefully will pass the legislature. I don't know if you know or not, but the Democrats didn't show up for work today.
I had heard.
Yeah.
I had heard. So you know, that's not going to bode very well for the future of this. You know.
Well, hopefully, sometime, you know, over the summer, the toolkit will pass, and the cap will pass. With that toolkit, could you actually, which is, as I understand it, changing a lot of these rules and regulations, or giving the municipal governments more discretion, rather than you got to follow the rules and do it this way. You can really run your own business, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Are there ways that you're going to see that you could actually save money if you were less constrained by the rules and regulations?
Absolutely. And one of our biggest complaints, and I know I sort of commiserate with other mayors, that our hands are tied so much with what we can do with you know, unfunded mandates. Probably the 4-letter word to mayors are unfunded mandates. And the problem, you know, COA, we had the affordable housing, which I'm hoping, you know, I'm very optimistic, you know, somewhat optimistic, that we'll be relieved of that burden, because that costs us millions over the years in attorneys' fees, lawsuits, RCA costs, all of these costs. That's an unfunded mandate. And if we're relieved of that, we have more discretion on where we spend our money, not where we have to spend our money.
Right.
Now, I had spoken to the governor. I'm a big supporter of the 2.5% cap, but I've made it very clear that we need the other half of the equation. We need those tools in place, such as relief from civil service. Certainly binding arbitration reforms, pension reforms, all of these things that are the big ticket items that we really, you know, cutting a few thousand here or there for a miniature golf course, you know, it helps, but it's not going to make a huge difference. Not the way some of these, you know, 6- and 7-figure costs would. So I'm hoping we really need one to help the other. I'm confident we can stay under that 2.5% cap if we get the toolbox. So that's key, and he's well aware of that. I know the lieutenant governor. I've spoken with her at length about red tape, regulations, all of these things, where sometimes you have to hire people because it's a state mandated position. Now, maybe we could have somebody else do that job, but if the state mandates one person doing that position, then you have to hire them. So these are the kind of things that really add up. Another thing, opting out of civil service. I know that's very controversial because I understand.
Only with people who are benefiting from the civil service program. Yeah.
Exactly. But the way that this works, we have 35 interlocal agreements in Middletown right now. We are one of the leaders.
That means you're with 35 agreements with other towns.
With other towns.
To share services.
Either where we provide services for them and they pay us, or we pay them. anything to share services. I could easily do another 35 tomorrow if we didn't have the civil service restriction. And what happens is, when we're a civil service town here in Middletown, if there's another town that's not a civil service town, it's almost impossible to broker a deal, because you have, maybe union regulation, union contracts, and you have non-union. So it's very difficult, almost impossible, to broker a deal between those two types of entities, one civil service. So right there, that would sort of unshackle the town to be able to engage in more of this. And that's really where you can save some money. Shared services works a lot of times. Not every time would it be cost effective for each town. Sometimes geographically, demographically, population-wise, maybe sharing services wouldn't work. But it would be good for the town to have the option to be able to decide that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm hoping that that'll come to pass, where we can undo the civil service, or at least allow us the option to opt out of it. So that would be huge for us to be able to get that through.
Good. That also probably, if we could opt out of that, it would make it more easy to move people around, or to hire and fire, and like that. Whereas right now you're handcuffed,
exactly,
based on seniority or tenure or what have you.
In fact, this year, to help deal with the difficult budget situation, we had to have 38 RIF notices go out, and of those, we ended up laying off 16 people.
So you laid off 16 people?
We laid off 16 people, but we lost 40 people altogether through retirements. There were 5 resignations and 16. So we had I think we replaced 2 people who were statutorily required to be there. So 2 out of 40 is quite a ratio.
Middletown's overall staff has contracted by 40 people.
Yep.
And you're still looking at spending like $2 million more,
right,
because of the snow and the
exactly. If you take those factors out,
right,
and I almost look at it as two separate budgets. The one that we have control over, our management, and then the other expenses that are sort of foisted upon you. And some of it stayed. Certainly the 1.6 cut, it was very damaging. Something that I found out about recently, that was a big loss in revenue, and sort of shocked me, was we lost $400,000 in recycled paper last year. Either it's because people aren't reading newspapers, or they're not recycling, or a little bit of both. But it really cost us in a big way, and that was an eye-opener, because when you lose that sort of revenue, you have no choice but to make it up. Now, most of our expenses are fixed. Their salaries, their wages, their energy, their fuel for the police cars, things like that you don't really have a lot of discretion with. You need them. You need a certain amount of police to keep the town safe. You need a certain amount of workers to repair the roads, plow the roads, things like that. So you really don't have a lot of wiggle room there. So when most of your costs are fixed like that, there's very little you can do. When you lose revenue like that, those costs still exist, mm-hmm, and you can only cut back so much. In 1989, we had 397 employees in Middletown. Now we're down to 310, probably closer to 300 by now.
Wow, so that's almost a 25% reduction.
It is. And
since 1989?
Since 1989.
Okay.
And some of that is due to new technology, which allows you to do more with less folks physically having to be there. But again, we've seen these times coming, and you try and accommodate it. But there's only so much you can do, and you need a certain amount of staff. You need bodies out there to patrol the streets. We have the lowest crime rate in Monmouth and Ocean County, and I want to keep it like that.
Yeah.
And we have a high quality of life here, and a high, people love it in Middletown.
Yeah.
And we have our problems like anybody else in New Jersey, but we really have to do our part to make sure that it stays that way.
Yeah.